Of the millions of people who died under Stalin, one story is so tragic and so personal, you won't believe it's real. This is the story of a son who was born in the shadow of a monster, lived a life of constant rejection, and died at the hands of his father's greatest enemy. But the story you think you know of a simple execution is completely wrong. This is an insane story of a name that was a curse, a family that was a war zone, and a death that has been covered up by propaganda for decades. The victim wasn't a political enemy or some random general. It was Stalin's own son. This is the unbelievable story of Yakov Dzhugashvili, the son Stalin just let die. Picture this. It's the summer of 1941, and the German army is destroying the Soviet Union. They capture hundreds of thousands of soldiers. But one of these prisoners was completely different. He was a skinny, shell-shocked senior lieutenant, but his identity sent a shockwave from the top of the Third Reich all the way to the Kremlin. This was Yakov Dzhugashvili, Joseph Stalin's eldest son. When the Nazis realized they had hit the propaganda jackpot, they offered a trade, Stalin's son for a captured German field marshal. The entire world was watching. Of course, a father would save his son, right? Wrong. Stalin's response was so cold it's become legendary. His words were a death sentence. "I will not trade a soldier for a field marshal." With that one sentence, he sealed his son's fate. This is the story of the son abandoned by a monster and the final insane moments that historians still argue about. How does the son of the most powerful man in the Soviet Union end up as a prisoner, disowned and left for dead? To understand, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, to a relationship that wasn't built on love, but on tragedy and pure indifference. The story of Yakov Dzhugashvili starts with an insane tragedy. He was born in 1907 to a young Stalin and his first wife, Kato. And believe it or not, this was one of the only times Stalin was ever actually happy. He loved his wife. But just a few months after Yakov was born, she died. The man who would call himself the Man of Steel was completely shattered. At her funeral, he literally threw himself into her grave, and his friends had to drag him out. And it seems like in that moment, he buried any ability to be a father. And this is where it gets crazy. Consumed by the revolution, Stalin literally abandoned his son. He left the baby with his late wife's family, and for the next 14 years, Yakov was raised by his aunts, a total stranger to his own father, who was becoming one of the most powerful men on Earth. In 1921, the quiet teenager was finally brought to the Kremlin to meet his dad. This was not a happy reunion. Yakov, who barely spoke Russian, was a total alien in his father's new life. Stalin had remarried and had 2 new kids. To the dictator, Yakov was a ghost from a past he wanted to forget. Stalin treated him with absolute contempt, making fun of his accent and calling him weak. For a boy who grew up hearing stories about his powerful father, the reality was a brutal shock. He wasn't a son. He was just an inconvenience. This unbelievable rejection set him on a path of pain, desperately trying to get even a single shred of approval from a man who had none to give. Living in the Kremlin should have been amazing, right? Wrong. For Yakov, it was an emotional torture chamber. His dad watched and condemned every single thing he did, and their conflict blew up when Yakov fell in love with Zoya Gunina, the daughter of a priest. For Stalin, who was crushing religion across the country, this was the ultimate insult. When Yakov said he wanted to marry her, Stalin went into such an insane rage that the poor girl literally fled the house in terror. For Yakov, this was the final straw. He was completely hopeless. In a moment of pure desperation, he took a pistol, aimed it at his heart, and shot himself. He failed. The bullet missed his heart and went into his lung. As Stalin's second wife, Nadezhda, one of the only kind people in Yakov's life, ran to help, Stalin's reaction was pure, ice-cold contempt. "You are not going to believe what he said." He sneered. "He can't even shoot straight." These 5 words show you everything about their relationship. No sympathy, only disgust for failing, even at dying. Yakov survived and married Zoya, but their life was a total tragedy. They had a daughter who died as a baby, and their marriage fell apart in 2 years. It was just one loss after another, all while his father watched with disapproval. He tried to get away, studying to become an engineer. But even that wasn't good enough. Stalin had other plans, and he was about to force Yakov into the one place where you have no choice at all: the military. Stalin basically forced Yakov to quit his engineering career and enroll in the Red Army Artillery Academy. This wasn't Yakov's dream, it was just another command from his father. It was maybe his last, desperate chance to finally earn the respect he'd wanted his whole life. And for a little while, it seemed to work. Stalin only started to show a tiny bit of respect for Yakov after he joined the military. Yakov graduated just weeks before his entire life changed forever. In May 1941, he got command of an artillery battery. On June 22nd, when the Nazis launched their invasion, there was no emotional goodbye from his dad. Instead, Stalin just barked a command over the phone: "Go and fight." And Yakov did. He was thrown right into the middle of the most brutal fighting of the war. For a second, it looked like Yakov the soldier would finally be the success Yakov the son never was. The official Soviet story is that he fought like a hero and refused to retreat. But the real story is way murkier. Some people say he might have actually surrendered. Around July 16, 1941, during a massive battle, Senior Lieutenant Yakov Dzhugashvili just vanished. The unwilling soldier, fighting for his father's approval, was now a prisoner of war. When the Germans captured Yakov on July 16, 1941, they had no idea who they had. But once they figured it out, it was like they had hit the ultimate jackpot. They didn't just have a lieutenant, they had Joseph Stalin's son, a propaganda weapon beyond their wildest dreams. Goebbels' propaganda machine went into overdrive. They dropped thousands of leaflets all over the front lines with a picture of Yakov, trying to look okay surrounded by German soldiers. The message was designed to completely break Soviet morale. Follow his example. Why do you fight to the death when even the son of your leader has surrendered? They even dropped a letter he wrote to his dad. "Dear father, I have been taken prisoner. I am in good health. I am being treated well. Greetings to everyone. Yasha." Back in Moscow, Stalin didn't react like a worried dad. He reacted like a tyrant who had been personally insulted. To him, this was betrayal. Surrender was treason. When he heard the news, he was reportedly furious and said something absolutely chilling, just like before. He did not even manage to shoot himself. The Soviets fought back with their own propaganda. They announced Yakov would get a medal, the Order of the Red Banner, for his bravery, trying to prove he was a hero who got captured, not a traitor who gave up. But this was all for show. In private, Stalin was enraged. Yakov was no longer his son. He was a traitor. As Yakov was stuck in a German POW camp, Stalin's rage led him to do something unbelievably cruel. He issued the infamous Order Number 270, which said any Soviet officer who was taken prisoner was a traitor, and their families would be arrested. And he applied this to his own family. He had Yakov's wife, Yulia, arrested. He suspected she was the reason Yakov surrendered. She would spend almost 2 years in prison just because Stalin was angry. German propaganda even quoted Stalin as saying, "I have no son called Yakov." The ultimate test came in 1943, after the Soviets won the Battle of Stalingrad. They had captured a German field marshal, Friedrich Paulus. The Germans proposed a prisoner swap, the lieutenant for the field marshal. Any father would make that trade, right? But Stalin's response was instant and ruthless. It's one of the most famous quotes in history for how cold it is. "I will not trade a marshal for a lieutenant." His daughter, Svetlana, said he just told her, "War is war." But wait, the story is even more complex. Even though he said this in public, secret documents later revealed that Stalin was torn. He secretly ordered 2 different commando missions in 1942 to try and rescue Yakov. Both of them failed. This shows that maybe, deep down, there was a tiny piece of him that cared. One of his top generals remembered Stalin telling him privately, "Yakov won't get out of captivity. The fascists will shoot him." This sounds less like a man who doesn't care, and more like a man who knew it was hopeless. But to the world and to Yakov, the message was clear. You have been abandoned. After the failed trade, Yakov was worthless to the Nazis as a bargaining chip. He was moved to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp and held with other important prisoners. His mind and body started to completely break down. The fact that his own father had publicly disowned him was a crushing blow. The Germans kept tormenting him, taunting him with news from the war. But the thing that probably sent him over the edge was the Katyn Forest massacre. The Nazis showed him proof that his own father's secret police had murdered thousands of Polish officers. For Yakov, who had refused to turn against his country, learning his father's regime was capable of something so evil might have triggered a complete moral collapse. Filled with shame and despair, Yakov became more and more agitated, getting into huge fights with the British officers in his barracks. The combination of his father's rejection, the shame of Katyn, and the misery of the camp pushed him to the absolute edge. He was completely alone, betrayed by his father and tortured by his enemies. The soldier was now a broken man in a nightmare with zero hope of escape. On the night of April 14th, 1943, everything exploded. After another massive fight in the barracks, Yakov Dzhugashvili just snapped. The German guards wrote that in an act of despair, he burst out of his hut and ran straight for the camp's perimeter fence. He deliberately ran into the neutral zone, a strip of land the guards were ordered to shoot anyone who entered. He was heading for the high-voltage electric fence. A guard named Konrad Hafrich watched him coming. According to some witnesses, Yakov screamed a final desperate challenge. "Don't be a coward! Shoot! Shoot!" Then he grabbed the electrified wires with both hands. What happened next is why calling this an execution is so misleading. The official Nazi report said he was shot while trying to escape, but later investigations found something way more tragic. The truth is, Yakov Dzhugashvili committed suicide. He was likely killed instantly by the insane electric shock. The guard then fired a shot into his head as he was hanging on the wire, probably to make the shot while escaping story look real. An SS captain who saw the whole thing said it was obviously not an escape, it was a suicide. Whether the bullet or the electricity killed him doesn't matter. The real fact is that Yakov, trapped by his father's cruelty and his enemy's mind games, chose his own end on a Nazi concentration camp fence. After the war, investigators found the full, secret German files on Yakov's death. They thought about showing them to Stalin at a big conference, but decided not to, thinking the truth would be too painful. For years, Stalin himself didn't seem to know what happened, and even offered a huge reward for information. When he finally learned the truth, his daughter Svetlana said the loss haunted him. He would just stare at a picture of the son he had been so cruel to, and said that Yakov was a real man, and that fate treated him unjustly. It was a tiny bit of regret, but it was way too little and way too late. After Stalin found out Yakov was dead, His wife Yulia was quietly let out of prison. In 1977, decades after he died, Yakov was secretly given a medal, but his family wasn't even allowed to collect it. Yakov's story is the ultimate tragedy of being a tyrant's son. He lived his whole life just wanting his dad's approval and died as a pawn in a game of empires, totally abandoned and alone. His brutal end is a crazy reminder of the inhumanity of the world back then, and the unbelievable cruelty of a father who saw his own son as just another soldier to be sacrificed. If you thought this story was insane, smash that subscribe button and destroy the notification bell for more deep dives into the craziest stories from the past. Let us know in the comments what historical story you think is unbelievable and deserves a closer look. Thank you for watching.